Can you hear me okay?
Yes, loud and clear.
Excellent. So let me just, so this is, well, good afternoon. I'm Heather Lau. I'm the director of the NYU Lysosomal Storage Program, and I'm a neurologist there for the past 10 years, and I take care of a wide range of lysosomal disorders, including late onset Tay-Sachs. Next slide. There we go. So I came up with this little section here because over the years, as I'm running trials, I always introduce the concept of a research study to my rare disease patients. And there's always a lot of questions and hesitation about, you know, what is a research study? What's involved? What are my rights as a participant? And what can I expect if I'm, you know, heading in for a consent process and meeting with an investigator? So a couple of things to think about when you're, you know, considering participating in a study. The big question at first is this an observational study or is it interventional? And Camilla alluded to that, where natural history studies are so important, especially in our attenuated lysosomal disorders like late onset Tay-Sachs, because we have to understand the heterogeneity of how the disorder manifests over time. There's different ages of onset and there's different components of the illness. So some of our patients have more weakness, others have more tremor, have ataxia. And it's really important to understand how it differs among different types of you know, age groups, the sexes, and also when you have other medical problems. So that's the first question for the researcher is, you know, what's involved? Is this something that we're going to just have a observation over time, or is it now going to intervene and have some kind of either medication? It could also be a specific type of therapy. It doesn't always have to be medicinal. And so that's the first question. And sometimes people think, well, if it's observational, then there's no risk to me. But there are potential risks in an observational study if there are diagnostic tests that you have to undergo. And we'll address that a little bit later about the requirements of the study. But when we focus on an interventional trial, the next question you would ask is, well, does everybody get access to the drug? Is it open label or is there a placebo arm? The gold standard for a researcher is to compare the active drug to a control group, but sometimes that's very difficult. So sometimes you'll see an open label study done, but for example, in the IntraBio study, there's an open label phase. But other times there's a placebo phase where it's not only that you're receiving inactive drug, you don't know if you're receiving it. So it's called double blinded. And that means both the participant, the patient, the investigator like myself, are unaware of if you're actually on the drug. So why does that happen? Why do we do that? It's to reduce unconscious bias, right? You know, we think we're on the drug, we might actually enhance our performance unknowingly because mind over matter. So that's important to understand. So what does blinded mean? And typically an investigator should go through this in detail, but even before, as you're looking through clinicaltrials.gov for updates on any particular trials, that's what you're looking for. Is it blinded? Is there a placebo arm? And another question that some of you might not even think to ask is that sometimes it's not a 50-50 chance that you'll get a placebo versus the drug. Sometimes it's weighted, so it's more likely that you'll get the experimental drug. And so that's another question. And again, the investigator should address it to say, well, you have a 2 out of 3 chance of getting the drug. Okay, so what are the requirements? So the next question you want to ask is, well, all right, you want to have access to an experimental drug, but what do you need to do? What is the study requirements as far as assessments and frequency of visits? All of us, this is dedicating time and effort on the part of the participant. And so this is going to interfere with schooling and with work. And some of these assessments are very frequent and they could last the whole day or they can go over a couple of days. And typically, the investigator will tell you about how often you need to come in on site and what types of things. So this is really important. This type of assessment can happen in an observational study or an interventional. So for example, you would submit to a physical exam, you would get some blood work done, maybe some urine tests, But sometimes there's more involved aspects of the study. It could be rating scales, patient-reported outcomes, but more invasive studies like a lumbar puncture. You might have to undergo MRI, and that could have some, if you're nervous about claustrophobia. So the investigator will actually go through every single assessment, and that's the job of a PI, is to make sure that you're fully informed of everything before you sign consent. And so you'll get that information in that written document called the informed consent, and it will be written in language that you should be able to understand, with medical vocabulary defined for you. So they'll go through that in detail, and you'll go through whether or not you have to submit to all the assessments. Is there any options to opt out of? For a couple of studies that I've run, we wanted to do extra blood tests called a pharmacokinetic analysis, a PK, where you sit there, you take your medicine, they take blood before, they take it after, at 1 hour, 3 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours. And sometimes it requires an overnight stay. And so that'll be explained to you. And sometimes it's optional, so you can opt out. But other requirements are critical, and they can exclude you from the study if you don't consent to it. Okay, so after that, I think the next biggest thing is, what are the potential risks if you actually receive the experimental treatment? And so that is limited. We may have limited information. The potential risks are generated from prior studies. And so you'd want to ask, what phase of treatment is the study? Is it phase 1? Is it phase 2? Is it phase 3? So if you think about what a phase 1 study is, that means it's the first time it's ever been tried in a human, technically, in that particular population. So you'd want to ask, have any other patients ever had this medication? What was their experience? And what were their short-term side effects? Now, with a phase 1 study, it's hard to know what the long-term risks are unless this drug was used in other disease states. And so they'll go through what they know at the time of the study. A phase 2 and a phase 3, you'll have a little bit more information because you'll have the knowledge from the phase 1 study. So not all risks will be known, and they have to explain that to you. And then you have to decide for yourself, is this something that I want to take on? Do I want to take on potentially receiving a medication, and I don't know what the short-term or all of the short-term risks are for a phase 1 study, or even for a phase 2 or phase 3, what are the long-term risks? Especially if you're a woman of childbearing age. And we get to that a little bit later, but most studies, we do not want someone getting pregnant while they're on the study drug. And not only does it affect the females, but males. We don't want men getting their partner pregnant, just in case that there is any any possible risk to altering the sperm or the egg. So in general, you have to submit to avoiding pregnancy and having to delineate what type of contraception you'll do. So that's also a big decision for some of my families who are in that age range where they're thinking about starting a family. So the other thing is, how long is the study going to last? So some studies are very short, like the phase 1 is a short. It could last a few months or a few days, just to get a sense of the dose and the immediate side effects. But a phase 2 or phase 3 could last a year, 2 years, and then it could even roll into an open label study that can go on for many years until the drug is approved or the program's abandoned. So that's important for you to know so that you can plan for your future. What if you do want to get pregnant? Not now, but in the future. What are, how is this going to impact your daily life? How does it impact going to school or going to work? How do the study assessments change over time? Okay. Big question for when patients start in a placebo trial, a controlled trial. Am I guaranteed to get the treatment at some point? Well, that's a hard question because in theory, if after that first trial goes, say in phase 2, a pivotal trial, and they're still enrolling, sometimes the sponsor, the pharmaceutical company, will have patients continue on an open label phase of open label trial because they want to continue the patients on treatment and continue studying them while they're still completing that initial trial. And so oftentimes I do see patients who are in that double-blinded placebo-controlled or standard of care controlled trial roll into that option of open label treatment. And so you're not guaranteed to get the treatment, but sometimes by participating in that original trial, you have the ability to get access to an open label phase of the drug development. So what happens if I'm on the drug or potentially on, not sure if I'm on the drug or if I'm not, or the placebo, you don't know, but something happens and you get sick. Well, you report that to the investigator and the investigator has to figure out, is it due to the treatment or not? So what happens at that point? Well, technically, if you're on an experimental therapy and you have an adverse reaction that seems pretty much temporally and logically related to the drug, it would actually be handled by the sponsor. And so the sponsor would be responsible for the treatment costs and not your insurance. And that's a really important thing because you are volunteering yourself to be in a study, and so your care should be managed by the study sponsor. The hospital or the principal investigator will help administer that care, but the cost goes to the sponsor. Now, if you get a regular cold or the flu, that goes through your normal insurance. Again, this is explained to you all in that informed consent process. Now, so when I sit down with a patient, I set aside like 3 hours to go through a study, especially if there's intervention and especially if it's gene therapy, where it's really an irreversible treatment. And you get a copy of the informed consent beforehand to review, and we go like line by line through it. That's how I do it. And that's how it should be done, and allow you time for answering any of your questions. But what I also do, and what's important, is that every investigator should say, what are your alternatives to participating in this trial? Even if you're not, even if that investigator is not your primary doctor, or you're, and you're just meeting them for the first time, they should go through what are your alternatives. Anytime, obviously the alternatives is not to participate in the study. I will go as far as to say, well, there's other experimental treatments out there, whether or not I'm conducting that trial. So for example, in IntraBio and the Sanofi studies that I'm conducting, I'll inform the patient that there are other studies. And to the best of my knowledge, I'll explain to them the mechanism of action, the expected, what we're expecting or what we hope for, and a little bit about the study if I know it. Okay, so we answered the pregnant question. So the last one is, what do I want to, what if I start the study and now I want to leave? It's just too much, or I feel I can't participate, or I want to get pregnant. Well, the right of the subject, the right of the participant, is to withdraw at any time without any coercion, without any retribution or retaliation. So it basically, we would prefer that you let us know before something happens, say, for example, pregnancy, and we would stop the drug and ask you to come in for a final visit just for a safety check. But it's your right to end. Even after you initially sign that consent form, you can absolutely withdraw after that. And that's your right as a subject. The other thing that most subjects, which I didn't add here, is on the side of the PI or the principal investigator and the sponsor. So you as a subject have rights and they will be reviewed with you. But these are studies where the sponsor and the clinician running it can withdraw you from the study or exclude you from the study. And so every study has inclusion and exclusion criteria. And that's because they are trying to design the study for the highest yield of seeing if this treatment will have an effect. And so it's sometimes hard because if you don't meet criteria, then you don't get to be in the study. And that has happened in the past, where either you're too well, which is a good thing, or maybe you're too sick to participate. And for a variety of reasons, including for your own health benefit, you would be excluded from the study. So those are some of the questions I listed here for you. You don't have to memorize them, but when you're thinking about studies and whether or not you would be a good candidate for a study, it's important to kind of think about, these aspects of participating. And I'll pause there.
Great. Well, thank you, Heather, for that pretty comprehensive overview. As you were going through it, it just reminded me why we have the informed consent process, so that people can really understand what they're getting into and what the expectations are and what they can and cannot do, and that each study serves its own purpose. So there's going to be specific entry requirements depending on the stage of the study or what the study is designed to show. There was a question that came in. I don't know if you've had this experience with any of your clinical trials, but I think it relates mostly to the AAV gene therapies. Questions about people getting a COVID vaccine. Would that be recommended beforehand? I know these are adenoviral vectors for the AstraZeneca and the J&J vaccine. I don't know how much cross-reactivity there would be, with a AAV vector that might disqualify people. But has that topic come up at all for any of the patients that you see that are interested in joining clinical trials?
That's a great question. And I always like to back my answers up with evidence, but obviously this is a newer therapy. So as a clinician, not as an investigator, it's, first of all, these vaccines are not FDA approved, so they're experimental in and of itself, right? The Moderna and the Pfizer are a lipid nanoparticle, right, that carries the mRNA. So that seems safer in the sense of no eliciting any cross-reactivity. So I don't have a really good answer, but my gut is, for the AAV or the viral vectors, I would be concerned. And I haven't worked it through with my sponsors yet about this, but, in the US, mostly, J&J is on hold right now, right, in most places. I would guide towards the Pfizer and the Moderna so that we don't have any question of AAV cross-reactivity or concern. And because we don't have, it's not FDA, it's not fully approved, so it's technically experimental, and I don't know what type of reaction it'll occur. The AAV is pretty benign, but as it is, when we're doing gene therapy, we really, it's a one and done kind of thing. We're not able to redose because of the immunogenicity that you develop. So I'd be concerned about that. So I don't have a definitive answer, but I would err on the side of caution and go towards the Pfizer and Moderna versus the J&J, which is on hold anyway.
Just really quick, just with regard to the gene therapy trial for late onset NTSADs, we would not have any reason to exclude a patient for getting vaccinated for COVID. So it was actually something that was discussed with the clinicians, and I don't want to speak for them, but I definitely don't think that that should be something that one should, I think the benefits outweigh the risks, and I think that there's no reason. They're different viruses. An AAV, I know they sound similar, and an adeno-associated virus versus an adenovirus are different viruses, and it shouldn't make a difference either way. So please don't, like I said before, please don't change your lifestyle for gene therapy. Just continue what you're doing and make the decisions that are best for you.
I'm running non-gene therapy for late onset Tay-Sachs, and we're not excluding anything based on vaccine. So we're encouraging vaccine as well, but that was my hesitation with the J&J. So thank you, Heather, for weighing in on that aspect. But the other two, because my patients have had access to the Moderna and the Pfizer, that's been no issue for the studies that I'm running.